Good afternoon, everyone. So for those, welcome to those of you who this is your first webinar for Primary Guided Course that you've attended. Just so you know, this is the third in a series of 3 webinars that we've been running, and I'll put the titles of the others up in just a moment. But today, as you can see from the title, we're talking about using the Languagenut Primary Guided Course for a personalised learning experience. And what we'll be looking at in the session, sort of to break that down, is we'll be looking at the primary guided course, and in particular at our lesson plans and the kind of resources that we have within our lesson plans and within our front of class slides that are there to sort of stretch, challenge and support different pupils. And then in the second half, we will also then have a look at sort of the different activities, such as our self-marking activities and ways that you can track pupils so that you can really get a feel for, you know, how they're doing with different skills, such as reading, listening, writing, speaking, and how you can sort of track that and set your lessons and assignments appropriately. I know that we'll have people joining us on the webinar today who have either already been users of our Languagenut sort of primary open resources and maybe are new to the guided course, and we might also have a few people who are still considering a subscription. So I will sort of show various aspects of the platform, and I will sort of be focusing in particular on helping out sort of those teachers who are potentially less confident teaching languages in the primary classroom, and also maybe early career teachers. That said, if you are a seasoned primary language teacher, then I'm sure there'll be plenty in here for you to take away as well. So that's this session. As I said, this is session 3 of 3. Our first one was in September, and it was more of a broad brush overview of the primary guided course and talked about where you can find all of the documentation surrounding it, how to use that in order to get the most out of it. And then last week, we also did a session on the primary guided course and all of the different games that we have, both Languagenut games and various sort of language specific games, and some more broad games that we use across the course, so that you can really engage and motivate your pupils. So if you missed those, and would like to get the recordings or the slides from either of those sessions, then I'll be sharing my email towards the end of the session, and you can drop me an email and I can send those to you. Equally, if you want the slides from today's session or any of the resources that I'll be showing you later on, again, I'll be sharing my email at the end, and you can get hold of those by dropping me one afterwards. As I said before, my colleague Dave is in the chat. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please do type them into the Q&A. Dave will then collate those, and we will hopefully have a little bit of time towards the end of the session to go through those. However, that said, I do not want to take up more of your time, as I know we are sort of drawing to the close of our first half term, and therefore I'm sure everybody is looking forward to getting home and getting some rest. Fantastic. So, moving into the course, as those of you who have already seen the guided course will have seen, this is sort of the opening page to the primary guided course, where you choose your class, language and the year group. Once you've chosen that, you'll then be taken through to the dashboard for that year group. So this is French Year 3, and I will be showing French examples today. However, if you're a Spanish primary teacher, please be aware that everything that we've got in the French course is very, very, very similar to our Spanish course, with the exception of things like cultural lessons and slight grammatical differences at times as well. But yes, you should be able to get everything that you need to know from French if you are also a Spanish teacher as well. So on the course, and if you're in our lesson in the webinar the other week, you'll have seen this as well. We have different types of lessons. We've got phonics lessons, we have sentence building lessons where people bring together the vocabulary from the term and use it at a sentence level. And then the majority of our lessons, like this one, are based around sets of vocabulary. And so therefore the activities we have to support students and to sort of extend their skills slightly vary depending on the different skill that you're teaching and the different week that you're on. And we're going to focus mainly today on vocabulary lessons, and then a little bit on sentence building as well, and just look at the kind of activities that we have within those that will help you really, really challenge pupils that need it and support those who need more support. So we'll start by looking at vocabulary lessons, and we'll go into this week 1 greetings. And so this will take you to the lesson dashboard. So if you go into any one of our lessons, you'll be taken to the dashboard for the lesson, which has various information on it and various things that you can access. One of those big important one being the front of class slideshow. So that is what you can then go through with students at the front of the class in a sort of PowerPoint style presentation. At the top here in the oval orange circle is our learn, screen and reading activity, or any activity in fact for that week. So the idea of this is that if you have a little bit of time later on in the week, or if you just want to dip into the vocab set for that week and one of the activities, you can access this quickly from the learn screen and from the dashboard, rather than having to go straight into the front of class slideshow to try and find them. And then the big thing that we're looking at and focusing on in this webinar is our sort of extra section and the extra materials that we have available to help you extend and support students' knowledge of the language. And so for every lesson we have an extension section and a support section. The extension activity will be essentially a slightly more difficult activity than the one that is embedded within the front of class slides. So you can see in this one it's a multiple choice activity. As you get further up through the year groups, that might be a slightly different skill. So if you've done a reading activity as embedded in the front of class slideshow, your extension activity might be a writing activity. Or if you've done one of our easier writing activities like Blast Off, the extension activity might be a harder one like WordPod. And then the opposite can be said for our support activity, which obviously will be a slightly more supported, slightly easier version of what we have in the front of class slideshow. So in this case, again, we've got the reading word pup is the activity within the lesson, and therefore the support activity is a slightly easier match-up activity. And those are there really for you as a front of class tool. So we know that different schools have different amounts of time available to teach languages, and therefore if you have more time and you've either got time at the beginning of a lesson to introduce the vocabulary and do another activity that you feel will help them lead into it, and that support activity can help you. And equally, if you've got more time at the end of a lesson and you feel like your pupils have really understood what you've been doing that day, then it might be a nice chance right at the end as a sort of plenary activity to have a go at that extension. Another nice thing this area is useful for is that if you want to dip into, if you have any time at the beginning of the day or the end of the day outside of your lesson for the week, then again, it's just a really easy way to go in and dip into any of the activities that you've got, rather than sort of going and digging through the front of class slides. So another thing to draw your attention to that you can access from our dashboard for the lesson is the print resources for that lesson. So this is a really useful area that you can use to support your pupils, particularly those that you feel will need a bit more support with the vocabulary as you go through the lesson. So when you go into print resources, there are a variety of activities that exist from outside of the lesson, including in particular the vocabulary list for the lesson. So from here you can download that vocabulary list and select or unselect as much vocabulary as you want, which will then give you two versions of the list. One is the French and the English, or Spanish and the English, and the other is just the French with the English removed. And so you've got both a support activity and an extension activity here. What is quite nice, and I think what a lot of teachers will want to do as they go through the guided course, is to print off vocabulary lists before the lesson so that pupils can have those available to them, whether they're face down on the desk, if you're encouraging them to use them only sparingly, or just to have them there almost as a writing mat as you go through a lesson, so that particularly once you've moved on from a learn screen such as this, you'll then be able to sort of, those pupils who maybe will need a little bit more reminding of the vocabulary that you're covering will have that there as a support in front of them. I think it's really important to know that all students feel supported and feel they can be successful in a lesson, and this is one way to make that happen. We looked at different ways to introduce vocabulary in our webinar, in the first webinar we did of this series. One of the nice ways to use vocabulary lists when presenting vocabulary is on Languagenut you can remove the support language, so English in this case. And so by removing the English, what you can encourage students to do is have their vocabulary list face down to begin with, and to see quite how many of the words on the board they can work out, and they can sort of decide what the meaning is. And again, as you've got more lessons with cognates, or when they're a bit more confident with the language, they might be able to work out more and more, and then turn over their vocabulary sheet so they can then see what they missed or what they didn't get, or what any gaps were. And then obviously at this stage you'd then move on from the learn screen, and then with the vocabulary sheet students can then keep referring back to that as and when necessary. Next thing, and the sort of main area where you can find lots of our sort of additional materials, printables and sort of activities that are very much specific to that lesson, is in our lesson plans. So every lesson plan will obviously have our teaching and learning activities on the left-hand side. And so in this particular lesson, most lessons, in fact, will have a recall activity towards the beginning. And so in this lesson, because pupils are bringing together knowledge of time vocabulary days alongside learning vocabulary about how to say activities you like doing, begin the lesson with a recall of the days of the week. And when we do have a recall activity which is using vocabulary from a different lesson, we'll always give you the name of that lesson, so that, again, if you wanted to, while pupils complete this multiple choice activity, you could have gone back and printed off the vocab for that lesson. So again, if you have pupils who need their memories jogging, they can have that in front of them while completing this activity. Then obviously the bulk of our extension and support activities are in this extension, support and variations section. So on this particular lesson plan on this page, you can see we've got 3 extension activities. Sometimes there'll be more suggestions, sometimes there'll be fewer. Often we'll have that suggestion that during the starting routine, students can give more information. So if you've already seen the course, every lesson other than the very first lesson of year 3 will have this parler avec vos partenaires, or the Spanish equivalent, at the beginning, where students are encouraged as a starting routine to use that familiar vocabulary that they'll have covered at the beginning of every year, to greet one another, to ask how they are, and to say goodbye, so that they begin every lesson with something familiar. And are instantly using the target language. And again, this is a really nice idea and an area where, as an extension, you can get students who are more confident to maybe ask a different question or to offer up more information as a part of this starting routine. Another extension that you'll quite often see, and this is more relevant to those teachers who are using the course with students on devices. We do write the lesson plans assuming that most of the activities are going to be done as a front of class. However, we do know that we have some schools that get pupils on devices every lesson, and therefore if you've set the vocabulary as an assignment for that lesson and their students are working on a particular Languagenut game, if they finish it quickly, or if they feel really confident with that game or that skill, they could then move on to another listening activity in this case, or any other activity if you set the full 4 skills. Got another extension suggestion in this one, and this is to do with activity 3. And activity 3 is an activity where students are spotting from the vocabulary for that lesson whether or not in the sentence they can see on the board they can see a day mentioned or a time mentioned. So it's just a straight, they're not necessarily looking at anything other than that, and therefore they have to stand up if they see a day and they sit down if they see a time. And the extension activity for this obviously is to move on, rather than giving them more of the same, getting students to use a slightly different skill. So once you've decided whether or not we're sitting up, sitting down or standing up, you can pick one student maybe to tell you what the day of the week that's mentioned here is, and then you could get another one to actually translate the full sentence for you. So just a way of sort of extending that within an activity, and so you'll get lots of ideas like that throughout our lesson plans. And this is the same lesson, so if you were to scroll down, you would then see our support send activities. And so again, we've got a suggestion for a slightly different activity if you've got students working on devices. But then this lesson in particular ends with an activity where pupils are shown a sentence template on the board, and they have to create their own sentence and read it out to the class. And when we do this, particularly when presenting it in a lesson, as you can see there on the top left, normally what we will do is we will have either a visual aid like the picture that corresponds to that phrase or word, or we will have the target language there as the support language there, so the English is there for students as well. In this particular case, we have the pictures, and the idea would be that students will pick one phrase from the left-hand column and one phrase from the right-hand column and join them together to make a sentence that they can hopefully say out loud and translate. And if you want them doing this as a book activity, or you want them sort of walking around the room with it, we would also include that in our lesson plan as printable materials at the end of the plan that you can print off. So you can see there, we will almost always provide you with a supported worksheet, which you can see there on the top right, and then an extension version or an unsupported version, where rather than having the different pictures, you have a slightly more challenging scenario where students don't have either the translation or any pictures to help them. Another area in this then sort of moves on to writing. So often with writing tasks, we include these kind of supported worksheets or unsupported worksheets. So this is another lesson within this half term where, sort of having gotten used to the different sort of activities, different days of the week, pupils are then required to bring that all together and to produce their own comic strip, which is sort of describing what they like to do on different days of the week. And so, as you can see in the extension support section, there are 2 templates for this comic strip, which students will see at the end of the lesson plan, as well as a model which will be included in the slides, which is giving the idea of what a sort of model answer would be. So having gone through the model answer with pupils on the board, you can then have printed off either supported versions or unsupported versions of the comic strip that pupils will be producing in their own time. So as you can see, we're really trying here to make sure that you've got sort of options with support for those who need it and more freedom for those who are able to be a bit more creative with the language. We recognise as well with these activities, and it's mentioned in the lesson plan, that you might have some pupils who are confident with the language but aren't confident with drawing, which is absolutely fine, in which case there is also another version of this where you have the pictures written for you but no support language, or we'd suggest in the lesson plan that pupils can sort of draw an object to represent the action rather than themselves doing it instead. Moving on to another sort of way that you can use the guided course to extend and support is with our sort of speaking and writing activities. We're going to look in this lesson at a trapdoor activity. So you can see from this slide on the top left, a trapdoor activity is predominantly a speaking activity where you as the teacher would pick options from each of those trapdoors in the top left. So for example, you might pick mon ami et says. So you would then pick a student to get to read out the sentence and to pick and try and guess which of the traps you've chosen. So if a student would read out l'anniversaire de mon ami, and that is the one that you've chosen, they would be able to carry on. However, if they chose the wrong option, they would have to go back to the beginning. And so the idea is that they get used to that pronunciation while also sort of seeing it in a familiar context of the vocab that you've been studying at that time. And in our lesson plan here, our extension would be the more confident students. So if you've got a group of students that you know are happy with the pronunciation, if you've got them breaking out and working on this in pairs, if you've got some students that you know are particularly happy with the vocabulary, then we do also have in our lesson plan, we have a blank version of the trapdoor. So if you've got a group that you want to work with pronunciation on, they can carry on working on the trapdoor activity, whereas your group that's more confident can be working on creating their own, using their writing skills now and their creative skills to fill in the different options using the trapdoor on the board as a template. So as I said, then you've got a simple speaking activity that is then extended as a writing activity as well, which gives you more time to support those students who need the help with their pronunciation. Hopefully that gives you an idea for the kind of activities and the sheets that we have with support and unsupport in the lesson plans. We also have in the lesson plans a section on grammar hints. This is more for you than it is for the pupils themselves, and it gives you the chance, particularly if you are less confident with the language, to really sort of read ahead and get a feel for the kind of grammar that's being covered in the lesson that you're teaching. So in this case, we've got gender of nouns and we have the verb avoir. So you will have only taught j'ai potentially in that lesson. However, you've got the whole paradigm there. So that if you do have a student that asks, well, I don't want to say I have, I want to know how to say we have, then not only do you have that information there and you might know it already having read it, but you can also share it with them if needs be. And for those of you who have already had an explore or used in the past our open resources, this is also a nice area where if you do have more time to teach, if you've got more time to build grammar into your lessons, using these as sort of pointers for you, you can then go into our open resources. So you can see on the screen here, we've got our primary resources as well as our guided course. And within our open resources, you have our grammar and verb section, which has activities sort of at a sentence level based on a particular grammar point, so in this case gender, and then you also have a verb section where you have various different activities that you can also assign pupils where they can practice a different verb or all sorts of different verbs across different tenses as well. So lots of scope for extending here. Again, if you have the time. However, the grammar within the primary guided course is probably substantial enough on its own, but again, if you want to push that further, then you've got access to these resources as well, to set students separately. We're going to move on to our sentence building weeks. I'm aware of the time as well, so I'll sort of whiz through this. So our sentence building weeks are set up slightly differently, and they have a slightly different set of extension activities. As you can see, the dashboard still looks very similar. And your learn screen also looks very similar. And we do really suggest that these weeks are set up as competitions, and if you don't normally use devices in lessons, then this week, if you possibly can get your hands on devices for pupils, that you do get them set up on the platform and get them practicing in their own time or during the lesson. One of the nice things you can do with sentence buildings as weeks as well is treat them as a flipped learning activity and assign the vocabulary before you teach the lesson, so that by the time you get to the lesson, we have our front of class slides where one of the first activities is for them to translate the sentences for the lesson. And so if they have had a chance to have a go at those activities beforehand, then they can sort of use that more confidently. That said, if you do not have access to devices for this week, as I said, the front of class activities are all still doable, and we're taking you step by step through with those on the lesson plan. These are the activities that students can do during the sentence building weeks. As you can see, you can assign all of these, and they are scaffolded from our fridge magnets, which just require students to drag and drop the words into the correct order. Our dictation, which requires them to just write exactly what they've heard. And then the more difficult activities, or in fact the most difficult activities that we have in the guided course, because it's at a sentence level, is the Skyrise and translation, where pupils are actually required to fully translate one of the sentences from that week and type it out. All of these activities are self-marked, which we'll be looking at in a moment. And if you go through the sentence building week and you've got through to this stage, at this stage you might want to just set them off on these. But that said, we do have other activities within the sentence building weeks which are designed to sort of really stretch pupils and bring them past that kind of regurgitating of sentences to really thinking about how they can adapt them and create their own sentences. So all of our sentence building weeks will contain a slide like this, where you've got 5 of the sentences from that week, with certain words in brackets, and the words in brackets are words that could be replaced with another word that you've taught that term, and so it's encouraging pupils to use vocabulary lists, use their memory recall, words that they could replace in those brackets. So for example, instead of j'ai 7 ans, you might want to say j'ai 6 ans, so they can say I'm 6 years old. And so it's moving towards using the language more creatively and getting them to realise that they haven't just learned a bunch of phrases and words, they can put them together however they want to. Finally, with sentence building weeks, all of our sentence building weeks will have this 2 extension tasks right at the end of the lesson, which are there as a completely optional activity. As I said before, we know that some schools have more time than others, and it is a translation activity, getting them to use the vocabulary that they've learned this term and transform it. So we've given them the j'ai 7 ans for I'm 7, and you're asking them to tell them how would you change that to make it I'm 10 years old. Which then leads into a translation exercise where students are required to translate from English into the target language if you're doing it in our front of class slideshow. However, you will find in your lesson plans this extension activity, this translation activity will always be there at the end of a sentence building week. And again, it's something that you can choose to give to students who need a bit more stretching. And you can also choose whether or not, obviously we've got questions and answers there, but you can choose whether or not you want students to translate from the target language into English or from English into the target language. So that basically takes us through all of our lesson plans and the different areas that we have for support in those. And I'm just going to quickly, before we do Q&A, quickly touch on the different types of activities and the ways that you can use them to track pupils and to see where the gaps in their understanding are. So as I mentioned before, you're able to assign any of the vocabulary and sentence building from the Learn screen. This will then take you to a quick assign section where you can choose any of the activities between 6 activities to set as an assignment, and you can choose as many of them or as few as you like, which then students are then able to practice through their assignment section. One of the nice things about our assignments is that you can either choose to set an assignment for a whole class. So if you've got Year 3 French, you can tick that button, save it, and that will go to all of the students in your Year 3 class. However, we do also have the option for you to set homework or assignments or within class activities for smaller groups or just single students within a class. So if you do have a TA that can take a group out and either do a more challenging version of a lesson or a more supported version of a lesson, then you can set the work to those students who are going to be taken out, and they can do that there. Or equally, if you've seen that there are certain students who need more help with speaking or listening, then you can set specific activities and specific skills to specific students as well. So once pupils open their assignments, this is what they will see. They'll see any of the activities that you've set them within that week. So you've set the whole suite of all 6 tasks that they can be quizzed on in this week. And they can see the different skills down here. That said, when they do open those, they can practice any set of vocabulary across all of the different listening games that we have, if it's a listening task, and all of the different reading games, if it's a reading task, and so on. When students are completing their activities, one of the nice things for them is that they are all self-marking, and so they can see in real time which answers they're getting right, which answers they're getting wrong. And then you as a teacher, if you go into your assignment section, you are also able to track which of the tasks your different pupils have completed, the average score that they've had on them, and if you click on the results for those, you can then see exactly what score they got for each task. So you can see with the student at the top there, John, he did very well on the 2 listening tasks in this assignment, but not so well in the reading. And then the opposite can be said for the bottom student, Mike, who didn't do as well, who didn't perform as well in the listening, but did very well in the reading that he'd completed so far. So it's a nice area where you can see which particular skills your pupils are, excelling with, and which of them they need more support with. And again, don't worry if you're not planning on using the guided course with pupils sort of set up as classes within the system. We do also have a couple of resources available that we've just written in the last couple of weeks and will be available on our website eventually. So we have a sort of blank template for a pupil tracker for all of the different year groups, where down the left hand side we have the different objectives from the different lessons for that half term, and then you can import your class up at the top there and decide whether or not they're working below, towards, at or above that level for that particular objective. And then we also have sort of specific student versions of this spreadsheet, where if you want, you can print them out, stick them in books, and get your pupils to sort of self-evaluate on whether or not, on how they feel about those different objectives towards the end of term. So again, if you're not using devices, you can sort of use this as a tick list for the kind of things that pupils should be able to walk away knowing by the end of the half term, and you can sort of use that for your own tracking of your own data. So as I said, that was a fairly quick whiz through of the sort of ways that you can use the actual platform. I know that most people in the call already use Languagenut, so you're already fairly familiar with that. So hopefully you've been able to get a decent amount out of this session. I do believe we have a little bit of time for Q&A, so I don't know, David, if we've got any questions in the chat at all.
We've got no Q's to weigh at the moment, but if anyone wants to put one in the chat now.
If anybody does, please do. As I said, we're here to answer anything you might want to ask. And as you can see on the screen there as well, you've got my email address is fiona@languagenut.com. If you would like any of the slides or resources that you've seen in this webinar, please do drop me an email and I can send that over to you. And then again, if you're not yet a Languagenut user or subscriber, and you want to know more, you can contact support@languagenut.com. And equally, if you would feel like you would benefit from some more training on the primary guided course, then you can also email that support email, and one of our customer success team will be able to take you through it step by step. So I don't think we have any questions in the chat.
No, you must have been very thorough.
Fingers crossed. Well, it's been a pleasure. As I said, I know it can be difficult dragging yourself to a webinar when we're this close to half term. So thank you very much for attending and listening today. We'll have the recording ready for this webinar probably in the next week or so, and we'll send that out around to anybody who signed up. But yes, if not, I hope you are able to be able to enjoy your half term, and good luck with the last week. Oh, I've just seen we have a question. If yes, absolutely, we've already got our recordings up on YouTube. So if you go to Languagenut on YouTube and you find our account, the most recent 2 recordings are the previous 2 webinars that we did. Also, if you want the slideshows for them as well, if you just pop your email across to me at fiona@languagenut.com, and I can send them to you as well. Fantastic. Well, I think that's probably it. Well, thank you very much. As I said, this concludes the 3 series that we've done so far. We are also looking for ideas for another series to do in the spring term. So if you do have anything that you'd like us to cover in a webinar related to primary language teaching, please do, again, drop me an email. We want to hear. We don't want to be putting on webinars that people aren't interested in attending. So please do share your ideas, share your thoughts, and we'll try and accommodate them. But otherwise, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.